so there was a problem with the stream. It got disconnected, we'll say. So I played an interesting game that I'd like to take a look at anyway. And we went with a classical Queen's Gambit. And I decided to flip it around and let's take a look from the opposite perspective of the previous game. And I'm just going with the super solid traditional Queen's Gambit declined. Give a tickle to the bishop. He keeps the tension. And I decided to go with the second most popular variation. Just trade down, get to an ending, stay very comfortable. And we get this takes, and a lot of people are like, well, why can't I try to force things and take here? Well, it becomes problematic because anywhere you put the knight, I'm going to get some play. Now this bishop gets out easily, etc. And if, for instance, knight e5, you're looking at rook d8 or c5 to begin to chip away, and this pawn isn't as weak as it seems. So normally they'll keep tension like so. I clipped, and here I knew the main move is c6. I understand the structures with these positions, but I decided to play an offbeat move just to get a game because my opponent was playing quite quickly and confidently. And as soon as I played knight c6, there was a little bit of a thought there for the first time in the game by my opponent. I go rook d8, and my plan is going to be if he simply castles, I'm going to capture and then look to play e5 because of the pin and get some play and get my bishop out cleanly. So my opponent very wisely captures here. And now you need to know when you've done something wrong. And I was creative with knight c6, but it is not a good move. Now, you got to fix it sometimes and admit wrongdoing. I wanted the knight to be able to go to d8 because I remembered that in some variations, and I'm going to have to waste some time no matter what. So it's either move the rook, then move the knight, or move the knight back to b8 and admit wrongdoing immediately. The problem with moving the rook is if he goes, for instance, queen c1, I'm not going to be able to move the knight because the c7 pawn is going to be a liability. So I play knight b8 immediately here, and after knight e5, I get this typical Carlsbad structure. Now we're going to see a plan from the opposite side. I talked about plans for white perspective in the last video, so let's look at a little bit from black's perspective. Now, there are multiple ways to play against this. I mean, you could try to play for a5, for instance, to slow down the minority attack, but it is going to come eventually. So I just play knight d7 straight away, and here is the first quote-unquote mistake my opponent makes in the game, because this is a comparison of pieces. I'm behind in time and development. White's knight is better than its counterpart. So taking, and we'll watch the evaluation to affirm what I'm saying, when he takes, the eval gets cut in half. 0.4 to 0.2 may seem insignificant, but I like my points. So after knight d7, much better is to keep tension in the position with f4. Say, for instance, if a move like f6 to try to undermine, now I'm going knight g6, the rook's still covering this pawn, and this is just not fun. So there's really no good way to handle this knight. And if you take, notice what happens to the eval. It goes up in white's favor, and now we're having to play rook f8 to try to play f6 to combat the structure. Now, not the end of the world, but white's got some space, and definitely didn't work out as well as the main game with white taking immediately. And once we see b4, the engine likes the immediate a5 to go after the minority attack pawns before white gets fully set up to try to make this thing happen. And again, referencing the previous video, we've got white who wants to trade the a and b for the a and b, and that's just going to leave the c-pawn weak forever and ever. Now, there are positions where black can hold, but it can be very tedious defense, and it's one-sided where white's having all the fun. So you want to prevent that. So I decided to go a6 to prevent the b5 push, and after queen b1, I go rook e8, and this is just keeping an eye on the e4 square, staying flexible. Queen d6, again, flexibility is key, not rushing anything. And only now, when b5 is a threat, do I make this decision to actually play b5 myself. And time again, I've seen my opponents get in trouble when I go for this very solid structure against the minority attack. And it works in this case, but it does not always work. Because say, for instance, if this knight could still come to e5, that would be an attacker that could at any point in time clip my bishop, and when he gets the Alekhine gun going, the c-pawn would fall, and the entire structure in game falls apart. Without that knight, and without the ability for this bishop to root to hit the base pawn, I am quite safe here, and it's going to give me a free hand to get counterplay. So once I've locked down white's initiative, which a5 does this, now it becomes, how can I get counterplay in the position? So I start up with g6, king g7, this is just holding the g-pawn, and I see here that white's just sitting. So I sit as well. I'm like, okay, maybe he'll get impulsive, maybe he'll try to play for e4 too quickly, that'll weaken the d-pawn. So queen c2, and again, not in a hurry. Now I begin to show my intent, f5. I'd love to just do a kingside pawn storm. I want to try to rip him open. So white drops this bishop back and gets the bishop and queen battery going. If I'm too quick pushing these pawns, I could run into some serious problems. So not wanting to have that, simply rook f6, covering some key squares. Now g3, dropping the bishop back. Again, it's all about those key squares. g5, king f8. Now, when f4 is played, there is no check. The queen is not invading. And my pieces are well organized. My bishop, which has been passive the entire game, could very well become an attacking piece from e8 at this point. I get in f4, and finally the engine is starting to go, you know, black maybe a little bit there. Takes, rook e1, and I decide, because my opponent, this is a 3-2 game, but he's got 20 seconds left to my minute and a half. He's beginning to feel the pressure some. So I want to keep tension in the position and try to fish for a mistake here. Queen e3, bishop d7. You don't want to hang the bishop on e8. And after rook c2, he's trying to organize his pieces. Queen takes b4, and my opponent runs out of time. But generally, this type of position, you saw the plan overall of locking, and that was the main emphasis in me wanting to show this video. So you got the white perspective, what you're trying to do. You got the black perspective, what you're trying to do. You need to understand plans on both sides of the board. You don't just have a single-minded focus when studying middle game positions that stem from your openings. So hopefully you enjoyed it.